to Stop Booking Around. I'm Jon Cronshaw, and I'm joined today by another special guest. I have got Killian Carter joining us today. He is a science fiction author who is just about to go full-time as an indie author. So congratulations on his success with that. So I want to talk to you a bit about getting the right mindset to be an author, to be prolific, and to just get stuff done.
I really like the mindset side of things, and I don't know if a lot of people share that but it's a bit ironic, isn't it? You know, do you have the right mindset about the right mindset?
You need a positive mindset going into mindset conversations.
Yeah. So as soon as people heard you say mindset, they all probably thought, oh no, not mindset. And to be honest, I think I had that sort of attitude starting out as well. And it took me a while to realize actually there is something to this whole mindset thing. I think Joanna Penn has the successful author mindset. I don't know if she mentioned it on her podcast or something, but when I heard it, I was like, mindset, what good is that going to do for me? You know, in your head, it's almost like it's some sort of mystic thing that has no value. But eventually, you know, you come to realize actually, yeah, this mindset thing is really, really important if you want to be successful.
So this is something then that you have actually worked on in a conscious way. Have you kind of taken steps then to develop your mindset? Because for me, I've not done this. And the reason I've not done this is because I did a PhD where I basically had to focus for 4 years on one project. And then I had to balance that with teaching and marking commitments. And then after that, I went into journalism. And so I was working fast paced, doing a lot of writing and things like that. So then when I come to actually doing the author stuff, it's like, okay, I've got the thing to get the words done and not be worried about the muse or anything like that. And then I've also got the thing of I can focus on a project for years. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't leave a lot of time for sitting down and thinking about things in terms of mindset. And I think that's part of the problem as well. I like to say to people, you need to ask yourself why you want to write. And the truth is, for most of us, we probably kind of got into it by accident, or, you know, we went through this long-winded process and maybe busy doing a lot of different things, laying groundwork, like you said, and you just don't have time for it. It just doesn't occur to you, or you just develop some of it, you know, by accident without actually thinking about it. And but I think sooner or later it does help to sit down and invest some time in thinking about mindset. I did it by accident as well. I think I read a few books. They weren't books on writing or the author mindset, but they were books on general success. I read a few things by Dale Carnegie, MJ DeMarco. I read I think it's called Millionaire Fastlane. It's a bit of a tacky title. It's very clickbaity, but it's been very valuable in helping me understand, you know, what kind of mindset you need in terms of a successful business. And then there was The Silent Sales Machine by Jim Cockrum. So I kind of read those over the last few years, and I guess they started me on the road to realizing, yeah, mindset is a thing. It's something that we probably do need to give some thought to. And we're 100% convinced that that has helped in me getting to where I am now, which is, as you said, becoming a full-time author in the very near future.
Is this a kind of mindset in the sense that you're not thinking mindset in terms of just writing, you're actually thinking mindset in terms of business, in the sense that you're producing products, assets, that kind of thing?
Exactly, yeah, because when you think about it, a lot of people maybe put up a barrier when it comes to the business thing, but it is a product. Creating a book is a product. You can't separate the two. And that's when I said you need to ask yourself the question why you write. You know, some people, they're not interested in the business side of things, and that's fine. If part of the reason behind your writing is that you just want to have fun, or you want the recognition or accolades and awards or whatever, you might not necessarily need to treat it like a business. But if money is a factor, you want to do it as a living and to support yourself and your family, well, bills need to be paid. People need to be fed. So I think you need to sort of think about your writing more in terms of business, which again, all gets wrapped up in that nice package we call mindset.
What kind of things then? I mean, if there's something that we could change today, you know, where should we start? What are the kind of things that we should start to look at and start to think about?
In a practical sense, what I've been doing this year is I have a bullet journal that helps me kind of keep track of things in terms of my writing business, because if I didn't write it down, it just wouldn't get done.
What does that mean? I don't know what a bullet journal is.
It's just a journal. It's a journal. You can look it up on Google. It's a blank book or a blank notepad, and you kind of outline your year or your months or your weeks in advance, and sort of it just helps you track things, helps you create checklists. But the great thing about a bullet journal is that you can customize it, because a lot of diaries or workbooks that you get that are made for authors or business people or whatever, they're very sort of restrictive and they limit you and whatever framework the person has designed. Whereas a bullet journal, you just design it your own way and do whatever you want. But what I'm trying to get at is that as part of my bullet journal exercise, I have been collecting sayings throughout this year. And I think that if you try to collect sayings from successful people it doesn't have to just be in publishing. It could be authors or writers, but it could also be business people in general. And if you maybe select a saying that resonates with you per each month and just think about it for that month, try and incorporate whatever lesson that person's trying to convey throughout the month, and maybe meditate a little bit on it. How can I use this saying to help my career? How can I use it to help my readers? How can I use it to improve my work, my writing, etc.? So that, just trying to think of ways that we can apply that.
Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot now. What's your current saying that you're...
Okay. I was going to bring this up later anyway, I guess, but my current saying is, and this one really struck a nerve with me, is the true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. It's a bit philosophical as well, I guess. Purpose feeds into mindset a lot. I think purpose gives you a perspective on the bigger picture. I think one of the terms that gets bandied about a lot these days is perennial or evergreen intellectual property. So, for example, when thinking about your work, are you just pumping out pulp fiction, a book a month or even a couple of books a month and getting them out as fast as you can because you want to make money now? Or are you building a product that people will be able to come back and read? Maybe it's not something that's trending now, but it's something that people might be able to come back and read, 5 years from now, 10, 20 years from now, and they'll still get enjoyment out of it. So I guess it's immediate value versus long-term value. So just trying to, that's one thing that has helped me try to think about businesses in terms of the future.
I talk about this a lot with Russ on the podcast, and it's the idea of creating something meaningful, which is kind of more important than creating something that is going to give you that immediate gratification. And I think that's especially a big mindset thing with authorship in general, is this idea of delayed gratification, of a different kind of rush that you get from knowing that you've written a good book than you would get from completing a video game or something like that, which is more immediate.
Yeah, it's all the internet's fault, isn't it? Netflix and YouTube and Spotify, you can get everything at your fingertips, and you get that dopamine hit as soon as you see that like on Facebook or whatever. So that's definitely a big part of it as well. I try to look at it in more practical terms. So, you have a copyright of 70 years on your intellectual property. So how much of that 70 years are you going to use? Are you going to use 6 months of that? Which is what I think is a bit of a trend in certain circles at the minute, where things, you kind of focus on one book and ride the wave, and then it kind of dies out, and then you get another book in there. That does fulfill a purpose in itself. There's nothing wrong with that. But do you also think about things in terms of, what's going to happen for the rest of those 70 years? Am I going to leave behind a legacy or a product that can help support my kids, even my grandkids, when I'm not here anymore? So I guess it's all about that saying anyway, is about sort of thinking about the future and what may happen when you're not around anymore.
It's very much a long-term game, isn't it? This might be one thing that I am very much focused on is, my author career is definitely, I am basically on 18 months of a 5-year plan. So it's, I'm still kind of working towards where I want to be. And I know that it's not going to be for a few years, and there's been course corrections on the way and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that having that plan, like you say, or preparation and investing up front is a big part of it, a big part of the mindset as well, isn't it? Because, like you say, it sort of goes against this instant gratification thing that is going on these days. And one of these things, I can't remember who said it, but was it an actor that said, reach for the stars and you'll land on the moon or something like that? I can't remember who that was.
Sounds like it might have been S Club 7.
Oh, let's not break into any S Club 7.
For the stars. Climb every mountain higher.
Oh, good old S Club 7. I don't even want to know how long ago that was.
Yeah, that was the 90s, definitely. Yeah.
Oh dear.
20 years probably, maybe more.
You're making me feel old now, John. But yeah, it's a nice positive saying that, because the thought behind it is, reach as high as you can, and you might not hit that great height, but you'll still land somewhere up there. You'll still land somewhere higher than where you are now.
How can you use mindset to increase the amount of writing you do, or improve your writing? I mean, how does that play in?
We often hear the saying, starting is half the battle, but I like to add that it's the easy half. So starting is like, you get a wave of light infantry coming at you, and okay, that's great. You get that out of the way, but what happens when the cavalry and heavy artillery start shooting at you? So how many people have started writing a novel but haven't finished it? So starting a book is definitely hard, but finishing one is by many orders of magnitude harder. So it is about developing persistence, developing habits. And it's very hard to pin these things down, because it's very hard to be practical when it comes to mindset, because everyone's mindset is different, and one person might need to have a certain habit in order to be persistent, but that won't work for someone else, and they might need to have a completely different habit. So for example, I love to get up at 4 a.m. just because the kids are still in bed. Well, most of the time they're still in bed, and it gives me hours to get a head start, to get writing or even business stuff out of the way. Other people prefer to write in the evenings. Some people like to do sprints with a stopwatch. I find that depends on what mood I'm in. Sometimes it works for me, sometimes it doesn't. So that's why you often see these books on mindset or how to be successful, and people read them and come away really disappointed because it didn't give them any real practical, tangible things that they could take away and implement. And the reason being is that it's all attitude. If you have the right mindset, you will develop those habits or those practical things anyway. And I think that's why a lot of people get turned off by the mindset thing as well, is because it isn't always something that you can execute right off the bat. You have to give it thought, and you have to change things as well. And the brain has evolved to be very efficient when it comes to using up energy, and change means using more energy. So, that's part of it too. But developing great habits, that's what those habits are, is very much up to what kind of person you are, but developing habits and being disciplined with those habits is a big must.
I'm thinking in terms of the type of mindset things that authors need to jettison. I think there's a lot of authors look around the person next to them, the author next to them, and compare how they're doing, how many books they're selling, or how much they're writing. And I always think the only person you can compare yourself to is yourself, because only you are made up in that particular way. Last week I did a podcast about NaNoWriMo, and, I was talking about this a bit. And one of the things is just like, you are the best person at knowing who you are. So don't compare yourself to other authors. It's like, you got to focus on you. And we've all got different personalities. We've all got different things that make us tick. And comparisonitis is just one of the most damaging facets of being an author, really.
100% agree with you on that one. I think it all comes down to fear. I think if you boil success down into its fundamental components, fear is one of the things that gets in the way of people becoming successful. And one way that you can remedy fear is by educating yourself, because fear comes from not knowing. And the only way you can learn is by getting out and experiencing something and learning it for yourself. People, like you say, they look to other authors, they see what they're doing, they get disheartened. A lot of people look at those authors too, and they try to copy what they're doing. I think this is also a big reason why people fall for, some of the, not that they fall for, but they go and buy courses that cost thousands of pounds or dollars. And a lot of these gurus might be well-meaning and whatever, and may actually provide a really good service, but are these things that you can get in a book? Yes, most likely. Can you get them for free on a blog post somewhere? If you dig around enough, yes. I think it's kind of playing on that fear a bit at the same time, because people fear because they don't know, so they go to someone who they think do know. But the problem with that is, like you say, you need to do it for yourself, because what that person did 6 months ago, a year ago, even a couple of weeks ago, might not work for you, or might not work today. And something that does work for them because of how they're hardwired might not work for you ever. So it's one of those things. You have to get on your hands and knees, get your hands dirty, start digging, and then you will fail. You will fail, but failure is a precursor to success. So we shouldn't fear failure. We should embrace it. And I'm actually writing a book on that will hopefully come out next year. Yeah, don't be afraid of failure. It's easy to say, easier said than done. But the more times you fail, the better you get. So
yeah, and I think this is one of those things where in your why. If your why is about you want to do a business, then like any business, you need to invest. You need to invest properly. It's like if you were to open a restaurant, you wouldn't put out a couple of crates and some pallets and hope people would turn up. You'd buy tables and cutlery and employ staff and a chef, hopefully. So
yeah. And you think about a chef, like how many failures did they have? How many times did they have to cook a steak before they learned how to cook one, that's rare versus medium rare? Or, if you look at every single product around us, from our phones to our laptops to headphones or whatever, they all went through failures. They went through iterations, they went through testing, and they didn't work, or something about them didn't work, or they changed. And I think we have to look at ourselves the same way. We might start out thinking we don't need to do these things, but there is going to be failure. There is going to be a need to change and improve until you get to somewhere where you're happy with.
So I actually wrote a chapter about fear in the Stop Booking Around book. It was about how we've got the fear of failure. We've got the fear of letting people down. We've also got the fear of succeeding and not really knowing what to do with it. Like there are a lot of fears. Yeah. And the one thing that I think and what I do is I try and make my fears kind of work for me. Instead of letting a fear stop me from writing, I will put a even bigger fear in front of that. So it's like, okay, well, I can not write this chapter because it's really difficult to write and, it's dealing with some emotional issues that are really hard to cope with or whatever, but I need to write it. Or I've got the fear against it of if I don't write it, then I'm not going to be able to pay my bills next month. Or, or I'm not going to be able to carry on with this 5-year plan or whatever it is. It's finding a bigger fear of like, well, if I don't write this book, then I'm going to feel like a loser because.
Yeah. It's all about putting it in a perspective, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think you can do that with a lot of things. I think you can do this on a daily basis when you're writing, get in the good habit if you can work it around your life. If you are fearing the thing of failure, one thing I always go on about Russ to do on this podcast is do not worry, you're writing a shitty first draft. It's going to be crap. Mm-hmm. Expect the worst and then you can build on it. It's that thing of having something finished that you can work on and mold and shape and improve. Like that is what I really try and get him to do. And this is another mindset issue, is the idea of perfectionism. The idea that you need to sit there and produce something perfect every time when you sit down to write, and then you go back to it the next time and you go, oh, that's really bad. I'll rewrite it. Yeah. And then you go, oh, that's better. And then you come back a week later and go, oh, that's really bad. I'll rewrite it. And then you never get anywhere. You never complete it. So,
yeah. They have that saying that art is never finished, only abandoned. you do have to abandon it at some point. It's just a matter of figuring out when do you abandon it. And I suppose abandon is a bad word, but you can't keep polishing something. You do need to just get it out there at some point, don't you?
People want to create something perfect, but it is the imperfections that give something character and voice, and that's kind of where you need to be. You need to be in that middle ground, isn't it? You know, we've talked about on the podcast before about the idea of the point between order and chaos, and it's almost like you need that with your writing. You don't want it to be too kind of structured, and at the same time, you don't want to be all over the place. So yeah, it's kind of riding that balance. One thing actually that really inspired me when I was coming into writing. Are you familiar with Robert Heinlein's Rules for Writers?
I'm not actually, no.
They're a bit outdated now because they are more of a pulp mindset in the sense that, you know, it's the idea of writing for magazines and writing for a traditional publisher, whereas we're in a publishing arena now where there are so many different ways of doing it. I mean, you and me are both indie authors. Whatever you do, I think these rules can apply. So I'll just read them to you actually. So rule 1 is you must write. So that's a good one. You know, the idea of just writing, doing it, getting the work done.
You know, you're talking about people wanting to be perfectionists. The only way you're going to perfect things is by more writing. It isn't by sitting there polishing something you've already written. You have to write it, get it out there, and then write something else.
Rule 2 is finish what you start.
It's a big one.
Yeah. You know, I've got a few abandoned novels. I've got a novel, well, my first novel that I can't remember if I spoke about it on the podcast, but basically I did trying to do a Game of Thrones in space, and it had 13 point of view characters, and it was a complete mess. Didn't really have much of a story.
Sounds awesome.
yeah. But I did finish that, and that was a really good lesson because I had done quite a few full starts before that, getting to that 20,000 word point and then going, I don't know what to do anymore. So this is why outlining and, you know, planning and having at least some kind of ideal where you're going is really useful.
Yeah, it just shows as well that, you know, success is just a long string of failures at the end of the day. You know, again, I don't mean to keep hammering the point, but success and failure, they're both different sides of the same coin. And like what you said, there's a perfect example. You know, you had a few false starts. You know, you can consider those failures. I like to call them lessons.
They are. That's exactly what they are. I couldn't be where I am now if I hadn't done that and learned the lessons from that.
Exactly. It's essential to go through those processes, isn't it?
I was looking at an old external hard drive the other day and I found a short story I'd written in 2008, and it was like a 10,000 word crime story about Cornish terrorists. And it was like the story was pretty good actually. And then I think what took the steam out of it was I think there was something coming out in the news where, okay, this now looks like it's a copy of that. I don't think like that anymore. It's like, oh, well, if it's been done before, then whatever, good.
Yeah.
Whereas then I was like, oh no, because the whole twist was there was this terrorist cell who were fighting for Cornish independence, but everyone in this terrorist cell was either like an undercover policeman or working as a journalist or something like that. Like there was no actual terrorist cell, but they did really horrible things in order to kind of save face with each other. I was reading back at that story and it's like it was so badly written, and it's like it was just really nice to kind of like the story was there actually. Like if I rewrote it, it'd work, but it'd just need a complete rewrite, complete overhaul.
Yeah.
So probably not worth it. But it was just interesting to see how much I moved on in terms of my writing, in terms of structure and sentences and pacing, like all those things that I've kind of worked on, and it's like I have improved as a writer quite significantly, which is good.
I actually do something similar. I've got a printout knocking about here somewhere in my office, and I keep it on a shelf, but I can't see it right now. But what happens is I go clean up my office and I find this thing, and I leave it out on purpose because I wrote it when I must have been 16 or 17. It's when I started to, you know, really enjoy writing and thinking I'd love to do it at some point. And it's called The Reign of the Evernight Prince. And I was very big into fantasy at the time. David Lee Eddings and Robert Jordan and Robin Hobb and all those guys. And I thought to myself, I'm going to write this big, epic fantasy, being a very enthusiastic teenager, I guess. Unrealistic was more like it. But I wrote a brave part of the first book. And again, it was a false start. And what I did was I saved these. I was digging through a box a few years ago and I found this printout. It was like a couple of chapters. And I keep it around now because it's the same thing. I read it and I think to myself, wow, I've come a long way. And again, it's another mindset thing, isn't it? You look back then and you see how far you've come, and then you look at yourself now and you think, well, in another 10, 15 years, I'm going to improve as well. So it's always about improving your craft, isn't it?
Yeah, I've always got a craft book on the go while I'm doing other stuff. It's like, that's how I learn. I learn from reading and doing. So rule number 3 is you must refrain from rewriting except to editorial order. And what this is basically saying is, don't tinker endlessly with your story. You'll be modifying stuff, revising it, polishing it, doing that forever. And it's just what you said about a piece of art never being finished. Learn to abandon stories at the right time. So rule number 4 is you must put your story on the market, which is basically saying release it. That's it. Or if you're working with agents or traditional publishers, get stuff out around. Like rule number 5, which is the one that is more for the traditional one, is you must keep it on the market until it's sold. So you've got to keep shopping it around. With indie publishing, that's not quite as. Yeah,
you can change that for indie purposes, change that to understand the market.
I suppose this is the thing of like, okay, you've written this fantasy story, and maybe it's a bit of a genre mashup, and you'll try it with one market in mind. It doesn't quite work, so maybe you pull it, change the cover, change the title, and then re-release it. I mean, that could be that kind of thing where you can find success by positioning your story in different ways. And then rule number 6 is start working on the next project. When I read these, were just like, these make so much sense to me.
Yeah, I'm going to look that up. So rules for writers.
Yeah, it's Robert Heinlein. So, the science fiction author.
Yeah.
Some great stuff, actually. Don't know if you've read much of his work. But
I haven't, to be honest, but I'll add it to the ever-growing list to read.
Yeah. I mean, some of his stuff is a bit crap now. I think Stranger in a Strange Land is really good. Starship Troopers. Moon is a Harsh Mistress. That one's really good. Time Enough for Love is really good as well. And Citizen of the Galaxy, I would recommend all of those.
He did Starship Troopers.
Yeah.
Ah, okay, yes. I actually haven't read the book, but the movie was a huge influence on my own science fiction writing, and it's actually quite a lot of, well, not a lot of, but some of the ideas from the movie, the first movie, because the other ones were rubbish. That kind of, some of those things worked their way into my current series. So yeah.
Okay, well there you go. Yeah, you should probably give that a read then. Have you read John Scalzi's Old Man's War series, which is basically military sci-fi with cool training sequences and stuff like that? It's a lot of fun. It's basically old people getting rejuvenated and sent to an endless intergalactic battle kind of thing.
Yeah, it sounds like a similar premise to Forever War. That sort of happened, didn't it? They would go out and fight for a duration and then they'd come back to Earth, and because they were traveling at light speed, like everything had changed completely.
Yeah. That's Joe Haldeman, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I'm looking for it here in my library, but I can't see it.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah.
I should really tidy that library up. It sort of looks like how my head feels at the minute. If you want to be successful in anything you do, whether that be your career or your writing, the goal is to be successful, isn't it? And one of the steps to being successful is to having the correct mindset. And some people don't ever develop their mindset or think about it, and they just, because they go through so many iterations anyway, they naturally do it without realizing it. But I think there's a lot of value in sitting down and thinking about it. And I've learned a couple of lessons about success in the last 2 years that I think people might find helpful. The 4 things I have here are: always put helping people first. I think that's hugely important, because I think what we do essentially is helping people. And helping people doesn't need to be some kind of altruism or showing kindness to people. It could be selling people a product, but a product that they want and that will help them. And when it comes to writing, you could write a good book, but it might not be the book that your audience wants. You know, it might not help them because it doesn't have the right character, it doesn't have the right tropes. It might just be poor quality, so you might need to improve your quality if you want to help them better. So if you have helping people as your motivation, it'll always put you in a good place when it comes to selling books and becoming successful.
I've talked to Russ about this, about the idea of focusing on the reader, picturing your ideal reader and writing to that person, and it'll change some of the decisions you make about your story.
Yeah.
Because you're thinking, okay, my audience isn't going to be interested in this, and I can either have the attitude of, but it's my story, it's my baby, I want to tell this, or you think in this kind of empathetic way where you're going, actually, what is my ideal reader? What is going to be expected but surprising at the same time?
And it kind of feeds into the next point, which is success is a process, not an event. And I guess that also ties into the whole failure thing. Success is a process, not an event. When I first heard that, it really struck me because a lot of people think of success in terms of, oh, that person got a car, they got a house, they got XYZ. You know, someone wins the lottery. Winning the lottery is an event. But that's not what success is. Success is, it's not something that happens, bang, there you go. It's something that is ongoing. It's always happening, and sometimes there's no end to it. So, you know, you don't get to a point and go, I'm successful. You're always being successful. You have successive failures, which hopefully are bringing you closer to whatever your goal is. That's what success is.
There's a joke, isn't there? It took me 10 years to become an overnight success. You know, it's that kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are exceptions to the rule, and, you know, there are overnight successes, but they're very few and far between. Mostly it's all about hard graft and putting the time in, being consistent, persistent, and just going at it. And the next one was, I really like this one in terms of being an indie publisher, but people with ideas hire people with skills. And I think that we can fall down there sometimes because we might try to do everything ourselves. I guess that's the nature of being an indie. You know, a lot more falls on your shoulders than an author who has a traditional publisher behind them. You know, you have to consider things like the cover, the editing, the marketing, and the list goes on. But you don't necessarily do all those things yourself, even if you have to take ownership of them and responsibility for them. These are things you want to outsource to other people. The cover being a prime example. I mean, we know what happens when an author tries to do their own cover. It's not always very pretty.
Yeah, you need to have those skills. And it's the same with editing as well. You need a professional editor. And if you don't, it's obvious, it's really obvious when you read something that has been self-edited, because there's always stuff in there where you think that is redundant. You don't need that, or you've got the wrong word there.
Yeah. So, I mean, these are things that, you know, you've got the ideas, so you need to hire other people who have the skills that maybe you're lacking. And like you say, editing, you can't see the wood for the trees because you're so close to your work. It's definitely, editing your own work is a big no-no. And then another one was, you find out what the status quo is and you do the opposite. And this kind of goes against the grain, because what everyone does is they go and look at what a guru was doing 6 months to a year ago. And they all flood to that. And because they all flood to it, the value of that thing decreases. It becomes saturated. The value's lost. It's a bit like stocks and bonds and things like that in trading. When you look at a trend, you kind of have to think to yourself, well,
is your billionaire romance really going to be selling in another 5 years?
That's it, yeah. And will it sell at all? Because that trend is pretty big. They've got a huge, voracious reader base, that genre does. But I mean, other things don't last that long. They come and go within 6 months. You know, you might catch that trend at the tail end, and you have to ask yourself, am I going to have enough time to write and publish this book? You know, will the trend be gone by then? I think that happened with some people with the colouring book thing, didn't it? So.
Yeah, there was the adult colouring books, and I mean, it's probably already past, but the reverse harem romance.
Yeah, it's another example.
So, I used to do freelance journalism between actually working for a newspaper and then going into this full time. And the thing that would frustrate me about the freelance journalism was, the rates could change and you made a sale and that was it. You couldn't then make another sale of the same thing because they were usually time sensitive and there was usually things within the contract that said, we want exclusive rights. It's like, for the same amount of effort, I've got something I can keep selling forever.
Yeah. What kind of products are you making? Are you building things that will last? And it's okay. For me, building, I don't know, I don't like to use this term, but cheap, inverted commas, at some point, for me, part of the process was learning to flip cheeseburgers at McDonald's. So I would write stories, that, you have to start somewhere, don't you? I would pump out stories and I look back on them and I'm probably not overly proud of those stories on their own, but that did allow me to get to a point where I can focus more on creating a better product. So, there's nothing, sometimes this can all be part of the process. There's no kind of like, oh, you should do this or you shouldn't do that. Sometimes you need to do it all. And by going through, the motions, you can get to a point where you can do better things and create things that your readers really want and be successful.
Just had a look on KDP Rocket at Billionaire Romance. It does say that there's 47,584
really? Wow.
Kindle books that match the Billionaire Romance thing.
Talk about competition.
Yeah, that is a lot of books that are very niche.
And you know what? It's not to dig it because there are people who make a hell of a lot of money in that niche, but you have to ask yourself, are those people have been writing for how long and they can pump out books faster than most people, do you really want to compete with that when you can maybe write in another genre and have it a little easier, I guess. I suppose the last thing I'd like to say is you can't really talk about mindset without talking about your mental health and even your physical health because it's all tied in. There's a saying that I like, which is the less weight you carry on your person, the more weight you can carry on your shoulders. It's true in a literal and figurative sense. You can't deny that if you're a person who goes to the gym or goes for a walk or gets fresh air and also eats properly, then your body's going to feel better. Put crap into your body and you're going to feel crap. And the same applies to your mind. If you put crap inside your head, you're going to feel crap. And there is a lot of rubbish floating around these days and a lot of ways to fill your head full of that rubbish. You can overindulge in things like social media or watching the news. That's one of the ways I think I've been able to gain some level of clarity. I haven't had a TV in over 10 years, must be now. Obviously, I watch DVDs, I do get the news online and stuff like that, but I haven't watched the television's broadcasted news in, I don't even know how long at this point. And it's made a huge difference between how I felt back then and how I feel now. And sometimes I need to do a bit of a clear out when it comes to social media. It'd be great if we could just do away with social media, but it's a necessary evil at this point, isn't it?
Yeah, it's true.
And, obviously this is all outside of things like, mental illness. Mental illness is a thing on its own. I suffer from bipolar depression, at certain times. And, if you have something like that, you should get the help that you need, medically speaking. But there are things, that most people can do to improve their mental state. And often, because the mind is connected to the body, it can be as simple as getting into a routine where you're trying to become more healthy, to eat better, things like that.
I don't watch the news anymore. That helps, definitely helps. And this is one thing I really like about Twitter, actually, is you can mute certain words so they don't appear in your thing. So I have got a list now that is really long and it includes a lot of things that I don't want to read about anymore because they make me angry or they make me depressed. So anything that is, if I'm reacting to stuff like that, that is a bad sign. So it's just like, gone. Things like Brexit, things like Trump, all these things are just gone.
Yeah.
I don't read that stuff. And, all the kind of social justice craziness gone. It's just, I can't deal with the insanity, so I'll just ignore it and carry on with what I'm doing.
That's it. You'll have to tell me how to do it offline, but that's the reason I abandoned Twitter. Well, I didn't realize you could mute certain keywords or whatever, but it was just a daily barrage of all of the stuff that you just didn't need in your life, You want to fill your head with positive thoughts. You want to fill your head with stories, with ideas. You want to do things in your mind to help you improve your craft.
Yeah.
And there's the more rubbish and crap you put in there, the less room there is for positive things.
Yeah. Well, Twitter by its nature is just resistant to nuanced discussion, which is something you need with a lot of these issues. So it just becomes divisive and tribal.
Yeah, there's a lot of hate out there, man, isn't there?
So avoiding that is really helpful.
Yeah. That's to get rid of the toxicity. It's all toxic.
Yeah.
And
all sides of the political spectrum. This isn't a political thing at all. This is just everyone's lost their minds as far as I'm concerned.
100%. And that sort of, that ties into the mindset too, because see, if you are associating with toxic people, you are going to have a toxic mindset. And conversely, if you associate with successful people, for example, in our cases with other authors, then you're going to have a successful author mindset.
Brilliant. So where's the best place to find you online?
You can find my website at kccarter.com. And I guess everything sort of links to that. So
yeah. And if you want to hear more of Killian's ramblings, there's also the Otaku on Writing podcast with yours truly and Lynn from a few weeks ago. He's another one of our co-conspirators on that. So you can finally Stop Booking Around book. It's available on Audible and paperback and Kindle. And if you haven't done so already, please do leave a review on Apple Podcasts. That will help spread the word about the show. And you can follow me on the Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. So until next time, cheerio.